Welcome to the Church Resource, where we talk about the best resources for pastors, leaders, and lay people. I'm your host, Jeff Oliver, looking at today the book Suffering and the Sovereignty of God. That's edited by John Piper and Justin Taylor. This originated as a series of talks at a Desiring God National Conference. The discussion there was just the same as the title of the book, Suffering and the Sovereignty of God. There are various contributors to this. Of the 9 talks that are given here that are transcribed for us in this book, of the 9, 3 of them are written by Piper, so a third of the book is John Piper's own material and transcribed from messages that he gave at that conference. There are others there, of course, Justin Taylor being one of them, who was a co-editor of this work, as well as some names you might recognize in the world of biblical counseling. There's David Powlison, also Stephen Saint, who is a missionary, is known as being part of that group that famously the Jim and Elizabeth Elliott were with and were slaughtered there as a result of their faith and trying to reach into other cultures. And so Stephen Saint is a part of that experience. Also, Johnny Erickson Tada is one of the contributors here, talking about suffering and the sovereignty of God. So a great work. I think this is something that is needful. I think I can tell you it's not very fun to read, but it's very necessary for us to read. You can just probably tell from the title. But it is something that if you stay around in ministry long enough, and that's more than, let's say, 6 months, you're going to come into a situation where you might be facing yourself the idea of suffering and wondering where God is in all of that. You might be asked questions from others who are in your charge, who are being shepherded by you, and they're going to ask questions about why did this happen in my family, or maybe more clearly, why did God allow this to happen in my family or in my life? So it's something that we need to look at. I think it's great. It's very helpful for us to look at ahead of time so that we can be prepared for those discussions or just kind of know where some of the information is within this book. I think that it's going to prove to be so useful, valuable, effective in your ministry as you take a look at some of these difficult situations. Now, I can tell you this is divided into 3 parts here: the sovereignty of God in suffering, the purposes of God in suffering, and the grace of God in suffering. Those 3 sections are what this book is based on and kind of how it's constructed. So just to tell you that and those 3 major topics, and then they go into some specific addresses that were given within those topics. I want to tell you about one of them at least. Let me back up and tell you the introduction here by Justin Taylor is very helpful for us to understand just where the book is going, what the kind of the thought process was in that. And so he says that the issue of how God's sovereignty relates to human suffering is what we're looking at. He says, but we have addressed questions, and I'm going to quote here from him, some questions such as, in which ways is God sovereign over Satan's work? How can we be free and responsible if God ordains our choices? How does God's grace enter our sufferings? And what is the role of hope when things look utterly hopeless? Just some of the questions that they seek to answer within this volume, and I think that's helpful for you to understand that as you go into this book, as far as what they're looking to address and some of the questions, these crucial questions that people have, especially in times of hurting, times of suffering, that can really lead them to doubt and can lead them to doubt away from faith in God. There are a couple of kinds of doubt, of course, that are the one that leads to more questions, that leads to more insight and more understanding, more reliance upon God. There's that kind of doubt that turns good. I believe that's helpful for us. That's actually a maturing process. And then there's the kind of doubt that people might have if they don't get good answers, especially if they come to someone who is a spiritual leader. They come to you and then you maybe can't give a sufficient answer, can't give any answer at all sometimes. they can really be led to just go astray and not be able to get answers to their questions. And so the logical assumption, maybe conclusion, would be that maybe there isn't an answer, and maybe this Christianity thing's not worth my time. So these are really delicate times that people go through, and I think it's going to be great for you to have this resource in your hand. I just want to mention the first chapter here. This address is by John Piper, and it's called 10 Aspects of God's Sovereignty Over Suffering and Satan's Hand in It. So as he goes through this, I think, I mentioned before, this is not a fun topic to look at, but I think the way that Piper and the other contributors to this address it, I think it is very hopeful. I think there is some joy to be found in the process here. I think there is a deepening of that current of faith that is going to be so powerful in somebody's life, and it really takes us. Suffering can take us if we understand it in light of the sovereignty of God, in light of His managing of everything that happens to us, everything that happens on this planet. Then we can really deepen our faith and broaden our understanding of who God is and His role in our life, in the role of orchestrating all of these things, as we know from the familiar Romans 8:28 that He would work in all things for good for those who love Him, those who are called according to His purpose. So this is a time really that we would get that deepening of faith, have a part of that maturing process go on. So it is tough in the time that we're going through these struggles, but in the end, I think it yields a great harvest and great results and a much stronger faith. So this is something we need to work through. And just an example of some of the sections of this address that Piper was giving on the sovereignty of God and in suffering. He says that we should celebrate that God is sovereign over over Satan's delegated world rule, that we celebrate that God is sovereign over that. Also, he says, and there are 10 sections here, I won't let you know about every one of them, but I want you to pick this book up and read this part. This is again from the first chapter. He says, let us celebrate that God is sovereign over Satan's angels or demons. Let us celebrate that God is sovereign over Satan's hand in persecution. And of course, as if you've read any of Piper, we know that there's a lot of scripture in here, a lot of even personal illustrations. And from his days of pastoring, there is a lot. It's just a wealth of scripture in here to be able to take from this. And so he says we should celebrate that God is sovereign over Satan's life-taking power. Also, we should celebrate that God is sovereign over Satan's hand in natural disasters and so forth. So you see, this is eminently practical for you as certain things come up in the life of your church, the life of your ministry group, a Bible study, even in your own family, and you have those questions come and people need answers. People want some kind of well thought out answer, not just a pat on the head and a one verse that's going to get them through the day, but something that is a well-developed theology and a good answer to what they're dealing with in their life. One thing to point out, just a feature of this, that there are a couple of appendices in this book. One is an interview with John Piper that was between Piper and Justin Taylor, the two editors of this. And so as John Piper dealt with the particular struggle in his life, and the other appendix comes out of a very real situation, a deep struggle that Piper had was when he was diagnosed with cancer, and how he, the day before that he was going in to be treated for that cancer, for the surgery involving that he had a kind of a devotional. He wrote his thoughts down about what he was about to deal with and how God related to that, where God was in his struggle. And then after he came through that surgery, David Powlison was diagnosed with cancer himself. And so this that's given as an appendix in the book is a discussion between those two men, between John Piper and David Powlison. The final feature I'll mention here in the book is that I mentioned there's so much scripture in here. There are 8 pages, in fact, of scripture index of where you can find various scriptures throughout this book. And you can look, again, 8 pages of that in very small print. You can see that throughout, I think it might touch every book of the Bible, but what might be a part of something that you're researching through or studying through, and you can see where that passage would line up with a particular topic they're talking about in the book here. So this is put out, of course, by Desiring God. This is by John Piper and Justin Taylor, Suffering and the Sovereignty of God. That's Suffering and the Sovereignty of God. You should pick this up and have this for ready reference. Well, this is one book on my shelf that's been helpful to me in my ministry, and I hope it gives you a bit of direction as you prayerfully consider which resources will best help you and the people you minister to. Thanks for listening to the Church Resource, and please make sure that you give us a review. And if you have any suggestions of resources you would like us to look at, email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com. That's thechurchresource@gmail.com.